right, so this is the day 4 and also a weekly recap that I'm going to do probably every Friday as I'm documenting the progress that we're making on Model Foundry. This week's main theme was kind of this viewer comparison tool, and we're going to look at basically what I did yesterday, which was adding a viewer for Babylon. Let's see if we can look up this bike. Let's see. So right now it's model viewer versus model viewer. Looks the same. If we switch this to Babylon, actually the lights are off too. Let's reset the camera. All right, so there's no lighting on Babylon, which you'll notice right off the bat. By default, model viewer has some lighting. That's just kind of this off-the-shelf model viewer configuration. I haven't decided if I'm going to make this off, like just have the lighting off. Might be nice for like emissive. So if we go to like Skelly, for example, his eyes glow. So if we have like no lighting on the right, you can see his eyes. So I'm probably going to change model viewer versus changing Babylon in this case. And Babylon, I'll probably give it a white background so that they match. But by default, you might notice this Babylon blue color. If you've used Babylon before, that's kind of the default configuration. But yeah, so this is the slider back and forth, up and down, and we can kind of compare. We can look at difference mode. Well, let's put on some lighting. For the best way to compare the two different viewers is to try to match the lighting as much as possible. And you notice that, let's go back to side-by-side mode. If we do like this, so we get the cameras linked, so we can pan and zoom. And one thing that jumps out to me is that it's a lot softer looking in Babylon. If we go back to this way, slide in the slider, you can see just the details aren't as crisp, but it's maybe a bit of a post-processing effect. So there may be some configuration settings that we can adjust within Babylon to make it match more similar to model viewer. The other thing that I'm seeing here is that the colors are slightly different, and I'm guessing that's the tone mapping. By default, model viewer now uses a new PBR neutral tone mapper that we recently released and publicized through 3D Commerce and the Kronos Group. Thanks to Emmett for putting together all that work. And yeah, we're happy to see how that really helps enhance highlights and tones. I'll probably do a whole session on tone mapping at some point because it's a deep topic. But I think that's probably that, plus the kind of softness, maybe post-processing, to me looks like the biggest difference as we skim across different models. And then, yeah, so we can see different lighting environments. That's another thing worth pointing out. On the left-hand side in Model Viewer, we're using these HDR environments, and I get these from Polyhaven. They're a great site. If you don't know them, check them out. I've been on their Patreon for, I don't know, at least 5 years now, I think, at this point. And they have, basically a lot of different high-quality environment maps. These particular ones, it looks a little blurry because I'm downsampling it to 1K because we really just care about the lighting in this scenario. We're trying to get it to light up our product. Let's get something maybe shiny. This trophy's kind of interesting because it's got the shine, and if you change the lighting environment, really impacts how the product looks, right? So the metal, that's another Babylon thing. I can zoom in further and tighter in Babylon than I can in Model Viewer. Let's get full screens. Lost my camera. All right, so I have this handy camera reset button. So in Model Viewer, we can spin it around. We can zoom in to an extent, but then we can't really zoom any further. We can't zoom out any further either. Whereas in Babylon, we can zoom out further. Model Viewer is kind of stuck there until we go back to Model Viewer, then they sync back up. So anyway, that was interesting. I tried messing around with some of the Model Viewer settings that allow the camera radius to be different. Right now it's auto, and the auto is kind of, intelligent enough that it won't clip into the product. Whereas in Babylon, if I zoom in too tight, we'll get some clipping in there. And we can zoom almost too far away. So in Model Viewer, they kind of limit how far you can zoom. I don't know if I'm going to change that. I think I might just leave it. It's easy enough to get back to an identical comparison by just switching to the other viewer. But yeah, so we've got side-by-side viewers. This is basically the highlight of the week, right? So the main focus was building out this tool, and it's a viewer comparison right now. We get Babylon, we get model viewer. I'm gonna add a few more. We have different lighting modes that we can check out. There's this difference mode, so let's match the lighting of the two viewers. And then if we want, let's recenter the product. If we want to turn on the difference mode, it kind of helps highlight what pixels are different between the two different scenes. So we can see, the background is mostly the same. But as I was starting to say, these HDR images, instead of using the raw HDR format, I converted them. There are actually two different formats for these two different viewers, but the one on the left, model viewer, has a format that's I'll actually show a link to it in here. So in the external tools, I get this Ultra HDR JPEG converter link. And this is pretty cool. It's a new format. It basically fits with inside JPEG. So if a browser doesn't recognize the additional data, the HDR image data, it'll still fall back and show you a JPEG. But with that extra data, it provides a higher dynamic range than traditional, just limited 8-bit pixels, let's say, like 8 bits per color. This gives you higher range, and it's a much smaller size. So that's pretty cool. In the right-hand side, where we're using Babylon, it doesn't, as far as I know, or as far as I could tell, support out of the box these newer JPEG formats. So instead, what I did is I used the Babylon sandbox tool to generate an environment file, so .env. So it's basically the same image, but it's loaded with the env file extension. It's lighter weight than a .hdr file extension, which these two viewers both natively support the HDR version, but it's much larger. So we're finding the JPEG one is like 1/10 of the size, and the one on the right, the environment one, it's bigger than JPEG. It's maybe 2 or 3 times bigger, but it's still smaller than HDR. And you see there's a few differences as we look at the environment map and, essentially what gets reflected onto the product as well. But they're relatively small. So anyway, this tool we built, mostly for doing the viewer comparison. But with a long-term plan of also having, if you have the same, viewer, right, there's no difference right now in black, which is good. But if I was to maybe change the texture resolution or change some of the viewer settings, like I was talking about post-processing in Babylon, maybe we want to tweak what it looks like with like a bloom effect versus not. So being able to see those side by side with the difference mode is helpful. Or even just, the A/B kind of product comparison. Or maybe you're trying to choose like a nice lighting environment and you're like, well, I don't want the clouds, don't want the studio light. And then you can kind of compare, side by side. So I think this will be a helpful tool as we build out 3D Model Foundry in general. One of the viewers that I'm going to add support for, it's a pretty good one for doing, let's go to look at the sample. So this WebGI, it's good for doing sparkles and diamonds. This is a product that I recently scanned. And, if we zoom in and just look at all these little tiny diamonds, they really sparkle and look really nice in this viewer. And they're using a kind of special shader. But my hope is that, by showcasing differences and examples of how models can look in different viewers, we can work towards getting all the viewers to kind of have common functionality so that maybe this type of diamond shader could be added to like a Babylon or 3JS, which model viewer is based on. And anyway, so there's a lot of viewers out there. I'm going to add support for probably at least 5. And then, if you have any thoughts or comments or viewers you'd recommend that you'd want to see as part of this tool, let me know. But so that's pretty much it for this week. Next week, I'm going to work probably on the Blender add-on, which we can use for ingesting and importing content for the 3DMF platform. And I'll probably also work on some of the camera settings so that we can customize and set what that default camera looks like, right? So if we go back to, let's say, the skeleton, and I do reset camera, that default camera position is one of many viewer settings that get loaded through. So I'm probably going to work on a tool for customizing those. Yeah, that's it for this week's recap and the day 4 recap. Thanks for tuning in, and catch you next time.